This is the third time that I've tried to record this video within the past 30 minutes because my parents are making an Eckelfecken tart, which is a real thing. It's very Christmassy. Google it if you haven't heard of it, which I doubt you would have if you don't live in the north of England. But yeah, I told them, leave me alone. I've locked myself in here. I'm making Eckelfecken magic with an Eckelfecken video so they can keep their tart, and I'll just eat it when it's done. So I wanted to make a video on the, I've called it the science and magic behind Winston's lab, but it's basically just a video about appreciating Winston's lab and not just the impact that it's had on the Overwatch scene in general, but just to give a bit of insight, having talked to a lot of the people behind it and the guys who run stats for it and come up with all of these things and how they gather them, just to give a bit more information. Obviously not any like trademarked secrets or anything, but just some information so that people can have a bit more appreciation for what it takes to deliver this kind of product and understand some of the limitations and what we could do with something like the Blizzard API, the stats stuff that they have showcased a little bit of for the preseason, and that which they hired Captain Planet to do, the kind of the live stats popping up and stuff like that. So if you haven't heard of Winston's lab, I would suggest you go ahead and check the website out now, because it's fantastic. If you have any interest in competitive, in the competitive games that have been going on, obviously, there aren't any happening right now, but for example, if you look back, actually the patch recently kind of screwed it up a little bit, and I'll go into that in a while, but you can look back over basically any tournament that happened in 2016 or 2017, and they have statistics for it, a huge range of them. I'll bring them up in a while just to kind of remind myself what they all are, but there is an enormous wealth of data on this website, and although it takes a little bit of time to look behind the scenes and figure out exactly how to get the data that you're looking for or how to get interesting stuff from it, once you have an understanding of how to work the site, it's beautiful, the kind of stuff that you can come out with. And basically, Winston's lab has been powering any kind of stats-based content that you have seen throughout 2016 and 2017, if it's related to competitive matches, like actual esports matches. The stuff that kind of Captain Planet and stuff did with the hero picks and comp diversity and stuff like this, I think he takes that from the website that he wrote for, Overbuff, which is more to do with ranked. But basically, I can't think of any stats that I've seen for players, top players in competitive games that haven't been powered by Winston's lab. It's basically the only stats site out there. And part of the reason for that is because Blizzard hasn't had an API out for stats, so you aren't able to look on, for example, their official website and see all the stats for the game. Although, hopefully, I think you will be able to for the Overwatch League. We'll see what they end up coming up with that. Maybe they only release them on the broadcast or something, we'll see. But they certainly have much more access to them now, and Nate Nanzer, in a recent interview on the Overview, was asked by ZP whether they intend to release more stats for contenders and stuff, and he said that that might be something they look forward to a little later down the line, because statistics are so useful for everything, right? If you want to spot upcoming talent, if you want to try and give some kind of objective data for why you think one team is better than another, or why one player is better than another. The styles that teams play are very identifiable through the statistics as well, if you know what you're looking for. There is just a huge amount of things that you can do with stats, and a lot of teams will, a lot of people will refer you back to things like baseball, where a Moneyball approach was very popular, made popular by the book and then the film as well, where not only did they use statistics to build their teams, but they found one key statistic that was more correlated with winning than other stats which were valued higher in the marketplace. And so this kind of stats-based stuff has been in sports and esports for a huge amount of time, and Winston's lab have been the guys holding it down in Overwatch. So the way that Winston's lab gets their statistics, because they don't have access to anything in-game or provided from Blizzard, is that they run the VOD, the graphical display on the screen that you can pull from from YouTube or from Twitch or something, and they run that through a program. I think they're called parsers. It's like a VOD parser, I think is the technical term for it. And basically what it's doing is it's looking at the screen and using image recognition software and ability to read numbers and stuff to pick out from both the HUD at the top, where it has everybody's ultimates and stuff, as well as the kill feed as well, to use kill icons and who killed who at what time and which ultimates were used and who's building their ultimates quickly. So it gathers every piece of data possible from what you see on the screen. So it can measure things like kills, deaths. It can also measure... Can it measure assists now? I'm not sure, actually. The assists were added kind of later, but it measures kills whilst using ultimate because it uses the kill feed for that. It measures time to charge ultimates, so the time that it takes you to go from 0% up to 100%. The average time that people hold on to their ultimates, because it looks at the time difference between when you attained your ultimate and got the tick and when it went back down to 0% again. But the key thing to note here is that all of these things are just from them ripping it directly from what you, the viewer, could see. If you had some kind of unbelievable brain that could take in all of the information that you see in one match and spit it out into numbers, you would be doing the job of what Winston's lab is doing at the moment. So that means that it doesn't have stuff like damage, which at the moment only Blizzard does, because damage doesn't really appear on your screen, on the screen of the broadcast anyway. But Winston's lab also has to do manual data entry, so they have people behind the scenes working insanely long days, actually, doing a lot of different stat stuff. But one of the jobs for a guy who really knows far too much about statistics and is far too intelligent to have to do such a monkey brain job is basic data entry. They take a VOD from the broadcast, and say it's X6 against Kongdu Panthera, they have to type in the names and allocate them to which portion of the screen they're on. So because for some reason the thing doesn't identify which slot they're in, for example, if when the lobby's all mixed up, people move slots, they have to re-enter which names they are and go through the VOD and make sure that everything's correct at the end of it. So there is actually quite a lot of manual fixing required, because it's such a, in the nicest possible way, it is a very hack job, right? It was never designed for this. There's no easy way of pulling data from a VOD. You have to design a program to look through it and be able to identify all of these kind of things. So it's really a fantastic technological achievement that Winston's lab has been able to do, to manage to rip so much data and host it all on their website and allow people access to it. It's fantastic. And as I mentioned before, some of the limitations of the data is that you're literally just pulling it from what you see on the screen. So you don't get stuff like damage done, you don't get heals done, you don't get shield damage done compared to hero damage done. What are some other things? You don't get how much people were damage boosted. You don't get to know people's accuracy, for example. There are a huge wealth of statistics that could be obtained, and I believe are obtained, because I've seen them pop up on, for example, World Cup broadcasts where they have the statistics, and I think they had Captain Planet doing the live statistics there as well. And in the preseason, we saw some of these pop-up stats, so you get a feel for what is available for them to look through and use. And obviously Blizzard, because they're the guys behind it, have access to a huge wealth of stats that Winston's lab doesn't have. Eliminations are another one. Winston's lab uses kills, as in final blows, because they appear on the kill feed rather than eliminations. And eliminations in this game are kind of strange because they give you some kind of, how the algorithm works out a proportion of what you did to get that kill, which is interesting. Most games, most esports just either give you the final blow, therefore you get the kill, or they give you some kind of assist if you got like the second most damage done to him, or some kind of algorithm like that. Overwatch has a slightly more intelligent view of it, I think. But Winston's lab just does kills, again, because it's ripping all from the kill feed. But the amount of data that they have managed to get is truly fantastic. And one of the reasons for this is because they come up with statistics themselves. So an often overlooked role that Winston's Lab, the guys behind Winston's Lab have had, this is the magic of Winston's Lab, is in the creativity of their staff to be able to come up with statistics. So things like time to charge ultimate are not something that was ever in the game, and was also not something that anybody was talking about in a strictly defined sense before Winston's Lab came up with it. These are the innovators of such statistics as time to charge ultimate, and they give you an idea of who's doing the most damage, and therefore you charge your ultimates more quickly. For things like tracers, a very low time to charge ultimate, that is a very high amount of damage done, and you're getting your ultimate very quick. A very low time to charge ultimate normally suggests that the tracer is playing a more passive role, or tank busting and really focusing on shooting divas and demeching them. It can just be a sign that they're playing absolutely nuts. If you know that the tracer from watching them in the match is somebody who likes to go for the backline or likes to have a kind of flanking role within the team, and they also have a really high time to charge ult, a really low time to charge ult, then you know that they're just hitting mad amounts of damage, or utilizing their damage very effectively. There are a huge amount. In fact, I'm going to try and pull one up. I really should have been more prepared for this. But let's see. If we just choose only lands, event, Apex Season 4, compare players, and apply the filters, this will give us... I'm not going to be able to bring this up on the screen, by the way, but I'll read out some of the stats that I think they've invented. I know for a fact that time to charge ult was one of them. Kills per ultimate is another one that was invented and started to be talked about with the guys behind Winston's Lab. And occasionally the kill feed can mess that up as well, because you have things like the Dragon Blade where if you get dash kills with it, they just come up as like normal kills. So it's one of the... And also pulse bombs, things like tracer pulse bombs are difficult to interpret, because if you get one on a tank or something like this, then they can just get demeched or taken down to a very low amount of health rather than actually killed. So it affects their kills per ultimate. But things like ult effectiveness, ults gained per 10 minutes, percentage team kill. I mean, these are fantastic statistics that the guys behind Winston's Lab have come up with by following the numbers to where they lead, or by modeling the game in their head and creating these things. So it's not just that Winston's Lab has had a great impact on the game by allowing us to look at statistics when there were none else available, and there were no ways of getting statistics other than through a VOD parser, and Winston's Lab stepped up and provided that service. It's not just that they provided that, they also allowed for a great interpretation of the game and people to advance their theories of the game by creating statistics like, for example, percentage team kill. This is PTK, which is often referenced on... actually, it's not referenced on broadcasts very often because they dislike using abbreviations like that are slightly difficult to understand, but it's often used when people do analysis articles or videos, and what it means is it's the percentage of kills that player is getting for their team. So people with very high PTKs can be somewhere like 30%. So they're getting 30% of their team's kills. So somebody like Logix springs to mind, somebody like Effect. Both of these guys on Tracer throughout Contenders Season 1 in their respective regions were getting somewhere around 30% PTK, which is pretty large. Obviously, people will be familiar, actually, with Fletter, who managed to get 50% PTK, as in he was getting 1/2 of the entire kills for his entire team. So that means that he was getting half the kills, and the other 5 players were getting the other half. And he managed to do that in 2 separate matches. This is unbelievable. And this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't be able to see easily unless this statistic was available and the guys behind Winston's Lab came up with. Other things, another really amazing statistic that they came up with is fight win rate, and even the concept of what a fight is in Overwatch. I know that a guy called Carahol, so there's a number of guys behind Winston's Lab. Baroy is somebody who is just a statistical wonder. He really knows all of these things off by heart, does a lot of work behind the site, does a lot of the manual data entry as well, and some other stuff which I'll get onto. Carahol does another huge amount of work, is very much sometimes the creative mind behind how a lot of these statistics are created, and also came up with the fight reader, which I'll get onto later. And I believe that he was the guy that came up with the definition that Winston's Lab uses for a fight in Overwatch, and something, and also the concept of fight win rate. So to define a fight in Overwatch is actually very complex. Some skirmishes can go on. I'll try and avoid using the word fight unless I'm using it in the context that they're using it. But some skirmishes, some battles in Overwatch can last for a long period of time. Some might last for a long amount of time but not actually end up in getting any kills. Some might be skirmishes where ultimates are popped off and then people retreat because that's the end goal of their fight. And so it's difficult to actually come up with a value for what that is. I'll grab some dinner in a while. Yes, okay. Or you could cook it and leave it for me. I don't mind. I thought I'd had all the interruptions with the Eckelfeckin tart. What's for Eckelfeckin dinner? Don't know. Who knows? Okay, where was I talking about? Fight. So the concept of a fight in Overwatch, quite difficult. So so how they ended up defining it is that it's a period of time from... So they broke up the entire kill feed, and whenever there was a gap of more than 15 seconds, they said that a fight had ended. So 15 seconds is fairly good, and that was using statistical analysis, I think, to try and find a nice even midpoint between drawn out skirmishes and those that happen very often. Even if a team is playing as fast as they possibly can, if they're resetting after one fight and there's 10-second spawns and they then have to get back into the fight, 15 seconds is normally just about as fast as you could get back into and start another fight, which is why they've used it as the gap in between. Obviously, it's not perfect. It's a subjective definition, but it works pretty well when you actually look at the numbers and how they represent what you saw when you watched the game. And so a fight is defined by kills that happen within a window where the gap between kills is not more than 15 seconds. So you have clumps of kills, a gap of 15 seconds, another clump of kills, etc. There might only be 2 kills, it might be 20, no, not 20, that would be ridiculous, but whatever, it might be 7 or 8 kills. And each one of those is defined as a fight within Winston's Lab. And fight win rate is the percentage of times that you came out with a man advantage at the end of the fight. So this obviously doesn't take into account stuff like assault maps, where you are frequently pushing into a team that has a defensive spawn advantage. They keep spawning, you keep killing them over and over again, but in the end the attacking team actually loses the fight and doesn't really get much percentage for it, or perhaps has used all of their ultimates, is in a worse position, but it still counts as a fight win for the attacking team because they were able to kill so many people off the respawn and only lost a few people themselves. So it definitely has its flaws for sure, as a lot of statistics do, but with any statistic, it's less about the flaw of the statistic, and if you understand what the stat means, you can use your own judgment to choose when or not you use this statistic. So for example, I wouldn't use it on assault B pushes, or would add a caveat that they were trying a lot of dry dives to force out enemy ultimates or something. The situations in which the statistics get skewed because they've been created and they're like a conglomerate of other stats, other fundamental stats, just means that you have to be more selective in when you use them. But they are brilliant things. And when you look at, I think Carahol did, he looked through the fight win rates over the entire season of all of the teams in Europe and North America's contenders, and he saw that in general it pretty much went down. You had the top teams sitting at somewhere like, I think it was 57, it might have been somewhere around a 55% fight win rate, and the bottom teams sat at somewhere like 40%, and it pretty much went down. There were a few blips here and there. For example, Rogue were getting a higher fight win rate but still losing maps, and these quirks of the trends let you ask questions and let you come up with ideas of why this statistic might be bucking the trend in the terms of Rogue, and allows you to do analysis in these kind of ways. It poses questions to you because it's such a thoughtful statistic that they've come up with. So this is they've also created something called the rating of a player, which is another. It's not. I suppose it is a statistic in a sense, but it's more of an algorithm that combines other statistics and just outputs one number. So this is a bit more like the Moneyball approach that people normally refer to when they think of Moneyball. It's boiling everything down to as few numbers as possible. In this case, one, using an algorithm, and the aim is to create an algorithm that most accurately reflects when people are playing well and when they aren't. And so anything over a 1000 rating is considered above average, I think. Anything below a 1000 rating is considered below average. And if you're at somewhere like 1200 above, you've had a really quite incredible performance on that map. They're normally broken down by hero. So if you just take a look at Apex Season 4 overall, and look at some of the players rated, but some of their ratings, you'll see that guys like Fisher are really high up there on Winston throughout the entirety of the season. 5 hours of gameplay, still had an average rating of 1,310. This is incredible performance. You've got other guys up there like Decay, Badosin, Zunba. So you can see that what people refer to as the best players just by watching the game are being accurately represented by their rating. And in general, it's a really interesting way, if you're just flicking through things, to try and find some undiscovered talent, like Decay, for example. Try and see how they've combined the numbers to come out with that. Who had a better, did this player have a better game in on Volskaya than they did on Gibraltar, for example? If the rating was 300 more on one map over the other, it would suggest that that's the case, and you would have to look more into the specifics to see why that might be the case. But if you just want a surface view, this rating number that Winston's Lab have come up with is actually fantastic for being able to do that. And again, this is something that they have put their minds to and created an algorithm that outputs this number. This isn't something that you can just drag from the game. So again, I'm coming back to this repeated theme that Winston's Lab and the guys behind it are not just using statistics or providing statistics, they're actually creating statistics. They are modeling the game and using their own theories of the game to create useful, unique statistics that we now think of, certainly in terms of kills per ult or a fight. I've certainly heard people involved with productions talk about fights as Winston's Lab defines them. So these kind of things are pervading into how people think about the game and how they model the game. Another interesting aspect of that, in terms of how Winston's Lab has pushed forward the theory of the game, was an interview that Giganti did. And now I can't remember whether this interview was a public interview or whether it was one that we did as casters when we were there for the playoffs. I'll just kind of roll with it anyway, because Giganti as a team, I mean, it's not like it was any kind of secret stuff, but they told us, or we read, again, I can't remember exactly whether it was public or behind the scenes, that Giganti's playstyle was heavily defined by their determination not to die in a fight. They would try and preserve their own lives as much as possible and have that as a saying within the team. They would repeat to themselves, don't die, don't die. It would be a call that they would say, don't die. Davin himself had a nuts performance. I think he went 80 for 30 over the course of the series or something. Only dying 30 times over the course of, what was it? Was it 6 maps? I think it was 5. Was it 5 maps? Was it best of 7? Might have even been 7 maps or something. What was Contenders? Contenders final was 7 maps, yeah. So Giganti played 7 maps in the finals, and I believe he only died 30 times. This is an unbelievably low amount of deaths, and came from the theory, the philosophy of Giganti, which was minimize your own deaths, make as few mistakes as possible, and you will end up winning the fights. And the whole reason for this, the reason that they gave for this as well, is the statistic, the fact that they stated, that is something that Winston's Lab has been pushing for a while, which is that the team that gets the first pick wins the fight. Remember, as Winston's Lab defines fights, the team that gets the first pick wins the fight 80% of the time. And that's a banana statistic, and obviously that has shaped how certain teams are going forward into fights. Less risk and going for the safer play and trying to bait your enemy team into making mistakes and being able to get the first pick on them is a huge advantage. Likewise, being able to dive effectively and get that first pick in the dive gives you a very large advantage. DPS players dying first has the largest negative effect on whether or not you are able to recover the fight. So if you lose a player early on in the fight, you're more likely to be able to still win it if it was a support or a tank. And I think the next one is tank. I think it goes like, if you lose a McCree, it's the worst for you. If you lose a DPS in general, it's pretty bad. If you lose a tank, it's pretty awful, but you can still recover the most if you lose a support. But again, the average time that you're able to recover is still only 20% of the time you're able to actually get back into the fight. And that'll change based on the level of play and what metas are running. But in general, this is the rule of thumb that they got through by analyzing a huge amount of data that's stored in their back end. So I think it's really interesting that Winston's lab and the statistics that they've been able to provide and the philosophy that they've built on the game and been able to showcase by creating certain statistics and graphs and things like this are brilliant. And I know this is one that Yiska talks about a lot, another guy that works with Winston's lab. There's a guy called Eden who works behind it as well, who comes up with a lot of theories for the game. So there's a lot of guys working in creative ways, providing the magic to go with the science. Another thing that's fantastic is the fight reader. I'm just going to close my door. The fight reader for Winston's lab, which is a way of basically being able to watch the game without actually watching the game. So you can skim read an entire match that happened within a couple of minutes. To be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I like to actually watch the VOD myself because I feel like it gives so much more information in terms of positioning and how people were taking fights, where their tendencies were to flank, what they were going for in the fight. Like, you can see their ideas. But if you're short on time or just want the base level, or want to take more of an analytical approach and just look at which ults were used when or who got picked first the most, the fight reader is fantastic for being able to look over it in a short amount of time. And what the fight reader is it's basically the kill feed, who killed who, and which ults were used, overlaid over a timeline. So you can look through and see as it goes down, okay, at 1 minute, Shadowburn killed Taimu, and they used an EMP, and they went forward, and then they were able to win the checkpoint. And so this fight reader is excellent at being able to just look through the map and be able to see the big points that happened and what led up to them. The next thing that we're really gonna come to here when I talk about Winston's lab is their future and how 2018 will treat them as they look at Overwatch League games. They were already messed up a little bit because, as I said, they use this VOD parser that looks at the layout of the HUD, essentially, when the game's being spectated. They were already messed up a little bit by the patch that happened where the broadcasted games now look incredibly different to improve the viewability, and I think most people would agree that they did a good job of that. They debuted it in the World Cup. A couple of the colors and stuff are slightly off and will be tweaked, I'm sure, but when it was debuted for preseason as well, there were improvements already, and the thing in general looked really nice. But it did mess up Winston's lab because their system, their software, their VOD parser was built on the previous layout of the screen, and so found it difficult to adapt, or actually just couldn't adapt. Because it's a bot in the nicest way possible. So less so to do with that, but more so to do with Blizzard's ability to release statistics. There could be a point at which the fundamental role of Winston's lab, i.e. to give data on kills, deaths, ults, the time to capture maps and stuff, the maps that people have played the most, the map win rate, your win rate with certain compositions, which compositions you've used the most. All of this could be available on, for example, overwatchleague.com if they release statistics. And I think it's relatively likely that they'll release some kind of statistics possibly even a full API that other websites can hook into and be able to relay this information very easily. And so for Winston's lab, it means that they will no longer be the only site able to produce this data. They'll have much more competition with everybody else, but they'll also have a lot more access to data that they haven't been able to use previously. So I think there's going to be a big shift in terms of how different websites are able to look at statistics, and how Winston's lab itself uses statistics and is viewed in the context of the scene. Because when everybody is able to have the raw data, it puts much more of a premium on who's able to interpret the data better, essentially. And the guys behind Winston's lab and the system that they've come up with and the statistics that they've created already give them a leg up in that sense. And they have a leg up because there's basically been no competition, because there has been no Blizzard API for the past, what, year and a half. So Winston's lab has essentially got name value, and I know that the Koreans bloody love the thing. So they already have a foothold above everybody else if the statistics were able to become available for everybody. But it does raise the question, what other tools could be created if there was access to the API, if there was access to the game in a more raw state than Blizzard currently gives it? And to refer back to TF2, if anybody is familiar with that scene, there was a huge amount of modification possible with the game, and all the raw data was available in files that were stored by the server and could be uploaded, called demo files. And CSGO has these with GoTV, or what else were they called? They were called HLTV in the past, obviously. That's why HLTV.org is called that. And these replay files contained a huge amount of raw data in text form packed inside of them. And very intelligent people in the TF2 scene realized that if you had the right programs, you would be able to tap into this file and extract a huge amount of data. And so TF2 had very interesting statistics at the end of every game on how much people were healed, how much people did heal, how much damage you did, how many kills you got, what your accuracy was, which weapons you used the most, which classes you played. Just a huge amount of information was possible because they had the access to the raw files. And so many tools were created with regards to that. I mean, we had tools that were able to spot, that were able to guide casters, tools that were able to provide statistics after every game, tools that were able to combine things and create like fantasy TF2. We had fantasy TF2 sites because the statistics were so readily available that anybody could make a fantasy site and use those statistics within their own model to create these websites. What else did we have? We had we had heat maps and things so that you could see where kills happened on the map most often, or where certain players got killed on the map more often than not. Or you could see people overextending in certain portions. You could see the percentage conversion rate of pushes based on where they were taking the fights and how often they tried to push and get time on the point. There were so many things available, right? And there were so many other tools that people created all the time. It seemed like a coder's paradise, TF2, because the game was so easily modified, and people kept coming up with new ideas and new amazing concepts for the game. Pug systems, pug websites, movie maker things that could get kind of hook into your game and be able to work through it. A huge amount of materials there. And Overwatch in the moment, because it's a little more closed off, doesn't allow for a lot of these things. But you have to imagine, if these things were available, the talent is definitely there in the community to be able to create magic stuff with it, and they would come from a different perspective to the developers. And that's what made the TF2 community so excellent in the ways that they were creating things, was that they had a completely different take on it to how the developers were. And the developers for TF2 were never going to make these things. They didn't have the the manpower or the resources. Overwatch definitely does have the manpower and the resources, but your community would still come up with new inventive ideas that you simply can't as a limited amount of people within a company. And so, to bring this back to statistics, if Blizzard does release stats and an API and things like damage and heals done, you could expect to see much more intricate models of how teams are taking fights, where they're pushing through, which avenues do certain teams prefer, how are they putting resources on certain players, who's taking the majority of the heals, who's doing most of the damage. Is it favorable to have to stack your composition in terms of damage, or in terms of shields, or in terms of health that you can provide to them and healing? There's a huge amount of modeling that could be done with these statistics, and Winston's lab at the moment is really paving the way with what little they can glean from the physical screen. And I think a lot more credit is due for them for what they've been able to go for. And I think there is still room for them afterwards, even if everybody has access to all of the stats in the world, because it's about how you interpret them and the models that you come up with, and how you can make the numbers interesting and reflect analysis of the games. And teams already recognize this. The guys behind Winston's lab work with the teams. They run their program on their scrim results, or on their scrims rather. Even though the publicly available statistics are only for tournaments, you bet that every team is able to look over their scrim statistics, and stuff like when Luna was cut from Luxury Watch and people were saying it was about the stats, people were going mental, like, this guy's only got, what, 5 hours in Apex played? How can they make the judgments on that? Of course they weren't making the judgments on that. They were making the judgments on hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, hundreds of hours of scrim analysis material that they have to work with through Winston's lab, who works with a huge amount of these top teams, compiling their stats and giving them recommendations, looking at upcoming players for Overwatch League teams. These guys are doing a huge amount of work. And if you haven't looked at the website and given it its due and found something to love in these statistics, then go and have a look at it. Take a look, think about the game, think about why certain players have such high ratings, or think about why they have such high kills. Think about the difference between players who are playing aggressive and defensively and how that's reflected in the stats. Think about why players like Davin have really low deaths, whereas players like Logix and Effect have much higher, for example, percentage team kill and first kill. That's another fantastic statistic that Winston's lab came up with. First kill, amazing for Tracers. Think about why Effect and Logix have such high first kill percentages compared to those other style of Tracers like Mikey and Davin and Clockwork, etc. There is science and magic to be found in the statistics, and you should absolutely go and revel in both in the Christmas period before Overwatch League happens, and really get down and dirty with the maths.